So today we're going to talk about big muscles require big peaking strategies. I thought none other than Alex and Darren, just because Alex has peaked a lot of larger individuals, has the 2022 NPC National overall bodybuilding title, correct? With
Yep. Yep.
and then obviously Darren, IFBB Classic Pro. Pretty much his name and his record speaks for himself. So I don't want to kind of take too long here, but I'm just excited to have like some of the J3U coaching team. Obviously, both Alex and Darren being a part of that team and taking on clients. I thought none other than these two to answer some of these questions. So I think one of the biggest questions when we start talking about peaking bigger athletes is starting actually before the peak. And I know, Alex, this was a big part of your peak with Law recently with that overall win last weekend, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
With Law was like that process kind of before you actually went to the peak and what that looked like. So kind of walk me through the big like things that you want to see happening in a prep before the peak even starts to happen as you kind of lead someone into showtime.
So typically, man, what and it's obviously it's a deep question, right? Because there's so many factors at play. But a lot of what I like to look into when it comes to, like one, are we ready for the peaking process, right? And so
Okay.
what I mean by are we ready is like, are we lean enough? And majority of time you don't see people coming into stage and the proper proper contest shape. So that was kind of goal number one, and so what I was able to find when we were about 3 weeks out, like he was on the money, about 203 pounds. And that was where I liked his look. He was dry, he was full, he was hard. I was like, man, this is what I want to bring us in on stage at. So having him ready, I was able to kind of have him like dive in a little deeper into more fat loss. But I wasn't willing to risk like, oh, I'm not going to lose his lines. I'm not going to lose his shape. I'm not going to lose his pop at this 203 mark. So that was kind of his standard. And what little bit I could get left, that last little week and a half before like 10 days out mark, that was kind of my play period. I'm like, all right, let's dig a little bit further, but I'm not going to sacrifice his overall look, because we knew with Law, and I think that's very important for people peaking, like striated glutes, yes, are great, but they're not like a true like standard. Like sometimes you can lose somebody's shape and symmetry and pop trying to chase that. And so again, like try not to dive like all the way deep in. That was probably the biggest thing, was finding his scale weight, about 3 weeks out that I liked. And then that was kind of my standard going in, able to use going into the peak.
And one last thing for his peak specifically before, like, Darren, I've got a few things I want to pull out of you just from your experience, but was the testing process was pretty interesting with Law. Like,
yes. And this is where, so if I were to like, people listening, if I were to give them advice on that, I see a lot of people talk about, a mock peak and this, that, and the other, but they're not in shape enough to do it. Like they're not getting true like variables. So what I like to say is, hey man, throughout the dieting process, throughout 16, 20 weeks, however long it's taking, you should be gathering data on like, hey, when I, if I refeed him a little bit, does his weight skyrocket up? If I reduce his fatigue by bringing his cardio down, does he end up losing weight? And so Law was one of those guys, every time I fed him, 2 days later, he dropped weight every single time, like clockwork. And so I knew that the whole prep, like it wasn't just one magic little mock peak I did, it was the whole time. Now, where that, kind of played into a huge factor was we got about 10 days out and I started feeding him and he kept dropping. And so that was that people will see that a lot too. And that's like a combination of, the stress is now coming down and, his food may have to make up like some of that weight that's being come up, like some of that weight that's dropping. So you're actually able to feed them a little more. But if I hadn't known that was his response, I would have waited too late and I wouldn't have been able to fill them out.